On the morning of August 1st, 1966, shots ring out from the observation deck of the clock tower on the University of Texas campus. It marks the infamous beginning of the modern era of mass shootings in America.
I'm Sarah Ferris, true crime podcaster.
And I'm Katherine Schweit, the former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
And you're listening to Stop the Killing.
Hi, Katie Schweit here from the Stop the Killing podcast. I wanted to share something with you that came across my desk just recently. Last year, there was a 6-year-old a first grader who shot his teacher. And we have some new news on that in a couple of ways. First of all, as you may have heard, the teacher has filed a $40 million negligence lawsuit against the school. And she, alleges that the school ignored things that should have warned them and that the shooting could have been prevented. Now, that is not a surprise that a teacher would file a lawsuit. What we have on the top of that crossed my desk recently is that criminal charges have been filed against one of the school administrators. And that is an incredibly unusual activity. And I think it kind of, again, speaks to how we are looking to hold people accountable if they could have prevented gun violence in the United States. So let's talk briefly about that just to give you an update. And then Sarah Ferris, my co-podcaster, will make sure that the show notes have the original show that we talked about, where we talked about the shooting of the 6-year-old, and I'll provide some of the details here. But the most interesting update is that in April of 2024, the former assistant principal of the elementary school was charged with felony child neglect. This would come about a year after the school shooting. And so it's pretty crazy to see these, again, a very unusual circumstance where a school official has charges filed against them. So a special grand jury in Newport News found that Ebony Parker showed a reckless disregard for the lives of the students at Richneck Elementary School on January 6th of 2023. That's what the indictment that was unsealed has stated. We have some of the facts, not all of the facts, but I can tell you, between the two, it gives us a little better picture of what actually occurred and how and when we knew what. So I'm going to read from some of my papers to make sure I'm accurate about that, so bear with me. But the criminal charges certainly are kind of rare, and each of the charges, of which there are 8 felony counts, carries up to 5 years in prison if for some reason she was convicted, just as a discussion we've had earlier and we'll have again, is even though somebody might be charged with 8 counts, even if they're found guilty of 8 counts, it doesn't necessarily mean they'd get 8 5-year sentences. Those sentences could be ordered to be served concurrently instead of consecutively, or some portion of it, and it certainly could be less than 5 years even if she is convicted. But let's get just a few of the facts down so that you know kind of what we learned from the special grand jury report that was unsealed. The court documents don't tell us a ton about the actual charges against Parker, but they do tell us some of the information, and so does the teacher's lawsuit tell us some information. And the allegations, in order to show this neglect, would have to show that the assistant principal committed a willful act or omission in the care of the students in a manner that was so gross, wanton, and culpable as to show a reckless disregard for human life. That's the standard for this type of felony crime. So that's what the charges are for. So what does that mean? Let's find out what that means and what we know about the facts of the case a little bit. The assistant principal, the report said, showed a shocking lack of response to multiple warnings that the 6-year-old had a gun in the hours before he shot the teacher. According to the grand jury report, the child was not searched, removed from the class, and the police and the school resource officers were not called. So this report was released after the charges were filed against the assistant principal, and she had resigned shortly after the shooting. But in fact, the reason there were 8 charges is because although the teacher was shot once, there were 8 bullets involved, and the child pulled the trigger and shot once, but apparently didn't have the strength or the ability to pull the trigger again. But let's just back up and look at some of the facts that we know about. This is a 31-page report. We know that in January of 23, the boy found his mother's gun on her dresser and brought it to school in his backpack. There were issues about the young man to begin with. And then there were opportunities that day. So all of those are alleged in various lawsuits, and there'll be more in the criminal charges that follow. But part of the allegations, which were detailed in earlier reports, is that the child had a lot of disciplinary issues. He was verbally, physically difficult in the school year before, and he had been supervised in the school year, and you'll get the details of it if you go back and listen to the original report. One of the parents testified at the grand jury that during the past 2 school years, her son was choked twice by this classmate. But this says the parent was never given the boy's identity or told that he had a history of this behavior, including he tried to choke his kindergarten teacher. So he'd only been in school 2 years. He's a problem both years. And it was that boy in turn that, in fact, did shoot the teacher. So the part that is you neglected to take any action during that day really has to do with multiple reports, at least three reports that the boy had a gun. Over the course of 2 hours, this is from the report. I just want to give you the accurate information from the report. Over the course of approximately 2 hours, Dr. Parker acted in complete disregard for the safety of all the children in the classroom, all the children the child played with at recess, and all the children who could have been shot in the school. The assistant principal, in fact, was arrested and secured bail and was released. The grand jury report provides kind of a granular minute-by-minute accounting of each time that they said she disregarded actions. For instance, one of the teachers who spoke of a visibly scared and shaking child who reported seeing bullets from the boy's 9mm handgun during recess. And then I recall that the boy was threatened that if he said anything, that he would be attacked. A counselor then in the school then told the vice principal the same thing, that she had heard that he has a backpack. So we have another person, that's the counselor. And then the report says, Mr. Rawls, now the third person, that's the counselor, and fourth time this message has been relayed, went back to Dr. Parker and communicated that the child either had a gun or at least ammunition. Parker allegedly refused to let the boy be searched after his backpack was examined. So they went to see the boy. They looked at his backpack. They didn't find a gun in it. They saw the child sitting at his desk, and one of the other school officials asked that the boy be searched. And the teacher said, no, his mom is going to come and get him. And in fact, the assistant principal allegedly said that she didn't think the boy could secret a gun in he's had little tiny pockets. He can't secret the gun. So she kind of brushed it off as saying, oh no, he can't possibly have had the gun because his pockets were too small. But in fact, he did have the gun. He had it at his desk. When the teacher was sitting at the desk right in front of him and he was at his desk, he raised the gun and shot her while she was sitting at the desk working. The bullet went through her hand and then through her chest into her lung, collapsing the lung and resulting in surgery and obviously a lot of medical things that followed on with that. But fortunately, she survived. Her lawsuit alleges that school employees had given administrators a series of warnings that began when she told the vice principal that the boy was in a violent mood and had threatened to beat up a kindergartner and had stared down a security officer in the lunchroom. And the teacher's lawsuit against her says, which is a civil action, says that she gave no response and wouldn't even look up at me. When she raised the concern about the gun being transferred to the backpack, the quote that the lawsuit states is that the vice principal said his pockets were too small to hold a handgun and did nothing. That's what the lawsuit says. The guidance counselor then asked for permission to search the boy, but the vice principal said no and said that the boy's mother would be arriving to pick him up. She was then, of course, in the classroom, and I believe there were 16 first graders in the classroom that day. of which one had been reported by 3 different students over the course of 2 hours to have a firearm. That's what the unsealed indictment says. So really, I just wanted to give you an update on that what we now have is not only the allegation of a massive security failure on the part of the school system in general to not have provisions in place. That lawsuit, that the teacher's lawsuit, alleges even more expansive things. Like, for instance, law enforcement had trouble getting into the school because they didn't have any access to get into the school, and they didn't have like swipe badges and stuff like that to get into the school. So there's more to come. But the allegations now against this vice principal, who has since resigned, she's named in the civil lawsuit, but also now she has been named in criminal indictment at the state level. And so it'll be interesting to follow and see whether or not a teacher or a school administrator can be held liable for criminal neglect. And let me give you again what they'd have to prove, right? The standard of care they'd have to prove. I'm going to give you that language again, because we'll listen for it in the future. Because the grand jury report says Dr. Parker's lack of response and initiative, given the seriousness of the information she had received on January 6th, is shocking. This is only heightened by the fact that she was well aware of the child's past disciplinary issues and had been involved in the decision to address his behaviors, both in that calendar year, school year, and in the previous school year. So the criminal charges against Parker list only the counts, but the allegation they would have to prove this negligence charge would be, did she commit a willful act or omission in the care of such students in a manner so gross, wanton, and culpable as to show a reckless disregard for human life? So more to come on this for sure, but pretty unusual circumstance to see charges filed against the former assistant principal for felony child neglect. I don't know that I've seen felony child neglect charges filed against a school official for a shooting ever before. If you don't recall the details of the case and the information that we had on the young man, the little boy, basically, who they can't even charge because he's so young, as you can imagine, then pop down to the show notes and pull that episode up. I encourage you to do so, and we'll keep you up to date. But for today, signing out.
Thanks for listening. And if you want to know more, Katherine's book, Stop the Killing, is out now. For more details, go to katherineschweit.com. Please consider also supporting our independently made podcast. It's simple to do. Go to patreon.com/Stop the Killing. And for as little as the price of a latte a month, you can be part of the solution to stop the killing. Patreon rewards range from official do-gooder status to ad-free episodes, autographed books, and opportunities to connect with us directly for your business, school, church, or even just a book club chat. But just knowing that you are part of a movement that has the power to make your community safer, well, that's got to taste better than a skinny cappuccino any day. So please head to patreon.com/Stop the Killing now and polish off your do-gooder halo and make sure to include your name so we can give you a shout out. This podcast is a community podcast production. That's con with an N. If you want more content, then head over to Community Podcast at Instagram, where you'll find trailers on more binge-worthy true crime, like the award-winning podcast Conning the Con. And check out our show notes for all the links mentioned. Finally, if you want one takeaway action that you can do right now that can help make our community safer, please share, rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. Everybody needs to know that they hold the keys to see something and say something. Together, we can stop the killing.
It's one of those things you hope never happens, but you better train for it, because it will happen, and it will happen in places you wouldn't expect. Be ready for it.